Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. I've had a few people asking what I thought of Umbrella Academy Season 4 because I'd covered the previous seasons. Notably, I had a lot of negative things to say about Season 3, so I know a lot of you are sitting there at home expecting me to absolutely tear Season 4 apart, and I'm here to disappoint you because I absolutely loved season 4 of Umbrella Academy. And I know, I'm going to have to give a long explanation as to why I love season 4 of Umbrella Academy. Is part of it because I guessed the ending in my season 3 video? Yeah, like it is. I was really happy with the fact that I guessed that, but I was also really happy with the ending. The thing I like about this season from the jump is the fact that I think finally the tone of Umbrella Academy is this kind of somber, adult tone that I've been waiting for the show to step into. A lot of the earlier moments in early seasons felt like it was infantilizing its characters. It always felt like it was a family of like 35-year-old people that acted like, 16, 17-year-olds. And I think as the younger fan base of this show became more prevalent, the writers started to lean into kind of making these characters more childish. They never really wrestled with the impact they have on the world around them. Season 3, notably, the world around them felt like, a Sims world. It felt like it was full of NPCs. And I really like this season actually places the Umbrella Academy in the real world. Like, it really does kind of make them look at themselves and analyze their place in the universe and the destruction they always inevitably cause. I really like that about this season. I really like the time jump. I love that season 3 ended with them basically emerging in this like reset world where they don't have any powers, and we meet them 6 years later this season, and the fact that they haven't had powers and have just had to be like normal people has taken a serious emotional toll on them. It feels like we're in the final days of the Umbrella Academy, and that's what I like best about this season, is there really is a great sense of finality in my opinion. I mentioned earlier in my other videos, I was like, oh, like each season, like characters will die and then they'll come back. Like the show always finds a way to have our core set of characters. That's really frustrating. I also mentioned the fact that after a while, like each season ending with an apocalypse and then just like jumping to a different timeline, or like jumping forward in time or backwards in time, it's getting a bit repetitive. Season 4 feels like the writers are sitting there going like, oh, did you think we were just messing around? Fine, like here's the somber, sobering ending you asked for. I really like it. And I know it's hard for a lot of like the fan base to see your characters in these like depressing situations. Like a lot of this season is really downtrodden. Like we meet them right in episode 1, and they've been without their powers for like 6 years, and a lot of them are like completely broken people. Klaus, for example, is a germaphobe, makes complete sense to me. Lila and Diego, the two sort of like thrill seekers of the group, are also experiencing like serious unrest in what other people would consider a pretty, lovely life to live. And I really like the sort of oppressively somber tone that like sits on this season. I also really like the choice to make it 6 episodes. There's a really good chance that the only reason this is 6 episodes is because Netflix like tightened their budget and didn't give them the full 10 episodes. Like that might be the reason. It might not be intentional. But to me, it gave me hope. I really like the idea that we were going to get a short, like snappy ending that cut out a lot of unnecessary side plots and just really focused on our characters. Now, you could make the argument that some stuff with Klaus or some stuff with Diego or Luther feels like filler side plots, but I think it serves as these really nice little moments we get with these characters before their inevitable tragic conclusions. So those are some general thoughts. In today's video, I am going to talk about the season as a whole, what I did like, what I didn't like. I'm going to talk about some episodes individually in particular, and then I'm going to go character by character. So I implore you to watch the full video, because if there are some points you feel like I've missed, I'll probably talk about them in the individual character sections. So before we continue with today's video, I just want to give a quick word from today's video sponsor, Aura. So as much as I enjoy immersing myself in the world of superheroes and their incredible abilities, I recently had a stark reminder that in the real world, we face a different kind of threat, one that can't be fought with superpowers. I recently discovered something that left me feeling incredibly uneasy. privacy, I decided to Google my best friend's name out of curiosity, and what I found was shocking. A data broker site had a vast amount of his personal information readily available for anyone to access. It was deeply unsettling to realize that someone so close to me was at risk due to this information being out there. And then it hit me. If this could happen to him, it could easily happen to me and those closest to me as well. The thought of my personal information being exposed like that made me feel helpless and honestly terrified. That's when I discovered Aura, the sponsor of today's video. Aura is a powerful tool that helps protect your personal information from falling into the wrong hands. It alerts you when your data is being sold on the dark web or by data brokers, and it automatically removes your information from these sites, giving you peace of mind. In today's digital age, protecting our privacy is more important than ever, with data breaches becoming increasingly common, like the recent AT&T incident where over 73 million customer records were leaked on the dark web. Having a reliable security solution is crucial. Aura provides comprehensive protection, monitoring your accounts, offering fraud alerts, and even helping you secure your devices. I value my privacy and I value yours too. That's why I highly recommend giving Aura a try. You can head over to aura.com/Stannis to start your free 2-week trial of Aura. The link is also available in the description below. Take control of your personal information and enjoy the peace of mind that comes with knowing you're protected online. Thank you again to Aura. So, talk about what I liked in this season. I thought the action was a lot more focused and controlled. I've heard a lot of complaints that like, oh, this season doesn't have these like song number action scenes that like Umbrella Academy used to have. And I agree, like you don't get as many of those. But what you do get are action scenes that actually feel like end of days action scenes. So let me explain. In earlier seasons, sometimes it felt like characters were just fighting because the writers were like, oh, we haven't had an action scene in a while. In particular, in season 2, Ben and Lila have a fight where like Ben's teleporting around and it's set to a cover of Billie Eilish's Bad Guy. And I remember sitting there being like, well, obviously neither of these characters are going to die. They're not really fighting to win. It just feels like the show wanted to have a fight scene. Thank you. Oh, please, I do. Whereas in this season, you do get less action scenes, but the action scenes you get are genuinely like mercenaries trying to kill the Umbrella Academy, or conversely, it's the Umbrella Academy completely wiping out of town. These aren't just action scenes where characters are kind of having fun fights. These are high stakes, life or death action scenes. So on the one hand, I do get that was something the fans really appreciated, but I appreciate the different feel that these action scenes had. There is a stark contrast between Five and Lila fighting in the bad guy section in season 2 and, you know, Ben showing up with his tentacle powers to free Jennifer and tearing up mercenaries with no regard for like any of their like personal lives back at home. That's another thing I really like about this season is you start to see the destructive effect the Umbrella Academy have on the world around them. And this feels like the only season that's interested in actually reflecting on the like impact that the Umbrella Academy's existence has on the world around them. You know, like in previous seasons, Victor will blow up the moon and their number one concern will be like, oh, we got to take care of Victor before actually taking care of the world. Like the Umbrella Academy, whether you like it or not, has inadvertently caused just like a massive amount of destruction and chaos and pain, whether intentional or not. And I really do like that this season just, it feels like end of days. And that's what I really love about the villains this season. I've heard a lot of complaints that Jean and the Keepers feel underdeveloped or not as interesting as Hazel and Cha-Cha. And yeah, they're not as likable or like fleshed out as Hazel and Cha-Cha, but I don't think that's the point. I think what Jean and the Keepers organization are really meant to kind of represent is the fact that the Umbrella Academy's chaos and choices in the past 3 seasons are inevitably catching up with them. You know, this complaint I've had about the first 3 seasons where by the end of a season, the whole season you've just watched feels kind of irrelevant and pointless because they just, you know, bypass an apocalypse and jump to a different timeline. These villains kind of represent a fork in the road for that. You know, these villains are basically representative of like a glitch, you know, like, oh, you know, these timelines are starting to merge. Artifacts from different timelines are starting to show up in this timeline. Like the timelines are starting to converge and fall in on themselves because the Umbrella Academy keeps, messing up different realities. It's super duper interesting. Like, I really, really did like it. I also thought the performances of Jean and Jean were excellent. I really like when Reginald's wife takes over the body of one of the Jeans, and it's just this really good performance where you can tell something's like not quite right, and everyone's a bit unsettled, and he's saying things that don't really make sense. Really good stuff. Also, I actually do really like the world building this season, and I think we did actually get a lot of answers to things that we cared about. I really liked the Ben backstory. It was somewhat predictable. I did see it coming that Reginald had killed Ben, but I also like the kind of moral questions that this asks, like if this destruction was inevitable, which we see play out when Ben and Jennifer eventually unite in this reality. Did Reginald do the right thing? I also really like how complex this season gets in terms of its morals. Some characters are doing really awful things this season. You see that in the Five and Lila romance. I am very confused at the fan base's reaction here in terms of like, oh, did they really expect us to root for that and support that? Like, no, I think you are meant to sit there and feel really uncomfortable. It is obviously hurtful for Diego. It's also uncomfortable given when these characters met, the different, the age gaps, like mentally and physically, like all of that is really messy. But I think, again, what this romance represents is the mess and the chaos that the Umbrella Academy's existence inevitably cause by existing, and the ending of this show, let's just talk about where the season ends, right? The entirety of the Umbrella Academy need to sacrifice themselves to essentially remove the Marigold completely and reset all the timelines to one perfect timeline, which the ending infers is our reality, right? The show aired on August 8th, and the ending of this season refers to August 8th. It's also the first time that we see our technology. I think that's actually a really neat payoff. Throughout this show, right, it's always had this really interesting relationship with technology. And that's because, and this is substantiated on in the comics, right? Reginald showed up and kind of like advanced human technology in some ways, which pivoted our course of like human evolution, right? So like he invented chimps that could talk and jetpacks and like really interesting alien technology. But for example, even though it's 2019, we don't have iPhones, we don't have MacBooks, we don't have computers. So it's really interesting when the perfect timeline is made, which ends up being our timeline, our reality. That's kind of confirmed by the fact that like the commission lady has like an iPhone and she's like about to track a run and go for a run. I thought that was like really neat, and it's really well done because it makes our reality feel like the really alien, strange one compared to what we've been watching in the Umbrella Academy. So I really liked that. But I really, really love the idea that like none of this matters. And I know that pisses a lot of people off. I know that bugs a lot of people, but just hear me out on this one. I like the idea that the Umbrella Academy spent all this time inevitably causing apocalypses and then trying to diffuse them or like stop them from happening. And the answer is that they just need to be taken out. It's sad, it's tragic, it's grim, but to me, it feels like what the show was setting up from day one. And I think the reason I called it in my last video, the reason I thought this is where the show was going is because one, I don't think it could have gone any other way and been super satisfying. There's one minor change I might make, which I'll talk about later. But two, I also think it's just kind of like reflective of Gerard Way's kind of like worldview. So now we need to talk about Gerard Way. So Gerard Way is the author of the graphic novels that the Umbrella Academy show is based on. Quick side note, I do not like the graphic novels. I think they're really clunky and silly and juvenile and like paper thin, especially compared to the show. But I really like Gerard Way's band, My Chemical Romance, and two of those albums, Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge and The Black Parade, they were concept albums, right? With these really tragic, gothic, Shakespearean stories. You get what I mean? Like, The Black Parade opens and the main character's dying and you're following his journey into the afterlife. Three Cheers of Sweet Revenge is also a story obsessed with like murder and romance and tragedy. Like, he is obsessed with that. He really likes that. So when I was watching the Umbrella Academy, especially in season 1, I always thought from the jump it was going to be this gothic, tragic masterpiece. And that's why I like the idea that the biggest threats to the family and to the world were coming from inside the family. I always thought that was cool. But they are out of place. You know, that's kind of the idea with the Umbrella Academy. They don't fit into this world. Five especially is a really good character to explore that through, right? He does not belong here. He is constantly out of time, out of place. Any reality, any timeline he shows up in, he doesn't feel right. It doesn't sit right. And that's why I really like the romance that's explored with him with Lila, because, you know, it just shows he can't really get anything right, you know? And I love that his blinking this season is almost tied to his emotions and his emotional state. I love when he taps out towards the end of the fight because Lila rejects him. And it's almost like instead of crying, he just blinks away. A really interesting moment, you know? It's like his version of disassociating is jumping to a timeline because that's what he's known for like 40 to 50 years. Really good stuff. So going back to the ending and why I like that kind of like tragic inevitability, I even like when Luther goes, oh, do we want to go around in a circle and share our favorite like stories? It's the biggest laugh I've got from Luther the entire show. And it's equal parts tragic. Like they all knock him down. And that feels like a moment too where the show is kind of like really embracing its gothic, tragic roots and the kind of adult nature that it lets slip in season 2 and season 3, in my opinion. And it does feel like the show's finally going, you know what, these characters aren't teenagers. These characters are 30-somethings that need to look at their impact on the world around them and, you know, really kind of like do something for the greater good. I really did like the ending. I also thought the effects were really interesting this season because it definitely looked better than season 3. I go back and watch my season 3 video. I did not like how season 3 looked. It was green screen, gobbledygook mess. This season is a mixed bag on the visuals. Now, in terms of how it looks with its like real world stuff, I think this might be the best looking season next to season 1. I think a lot of the shots look really good. I love the world building. Circling back to Gene and Jean and the cult that they run, I really like that they actually bothered to get a bunch of extras. We are back to a world for the Umbrella Academy that feels big and rich and substantial and alive, rather than whatever, you know, season 3 was doing with, you know, cars that are driven by nobody, etc., etc. So on the one hand, I really like the commitment to extras and real world sets. Everything feels tangible and real. However, there are some things I don't love. The effects for the blood and the gore are really bad. It feels like this season was trying to emulate The Boys' sort of like shock value gore with their powers. You know, for example, Lila's learning her like laser beam powers and she actually cuts someone in half and it looks like crap. It should be like a shocking, gory moment, but it looks so fake and silly that it doesn't really land. On top of that, the CGI blood squibs when people get shot are really noticeably fake. Most people love to use the actual blood packs. That's normally what looks the best on film, and sometimes you can get away with it with CGI. John Wick, I believe, uses CGI for their blood squibs, and they look pretty good. But the muzzle flashes, the smoke effects when bullets are hitting things, and the blood effects this season are really bad. And I think they're notably bad because the show is trying to be a lot gorier this season and kind of match The Boys with that like shock value content. And I think those effects needed a little more time in the oven. They do look like really early kind of like YouTube gun action skit violence, in my opinion. But all that being said, I thought the effects for the Ben Jennifer monster were really cool. Obviously not perfect, but I thought the character design and this like horrible, monstrous mess that Ben and Jennifer are turning into looked really like visually compelling. And I thought as far as effects go, it looked pretty good, like especially compared to season 3. Also, just quick side note, I really loved the visual parallel. Earlier in the season, we find out Jennifer's little backstory, right? And we see her head like eerily poke out of the squid's body, and towards the end of the season Ben's head starts to poke out of this like
disgusting monster that they've both created to talk to the group. Really neat visual parallel and just really disturbing and uncomfortable.
Now let's talk about some other things I did like and didn't like. There are a bunch of plot holes this season. Like, I can't get around that. There are some that I can excuse and some I can't. All right, so first plot hole, this is one I weirdly care about, is Luther having his gorilla body back. That just feels like, to me, that the writers just wanted the core group and how they originally looked, and it just doesn't make sense. Like, Luther's gorilla body was not a power. Now, the only argument you could make is that maybe the Marigold helped that gorilla surgery happen, and that's part of Ben's DNA Marigold, but that's really me reaching. To me, it doesn't make a lot of sense and feels like the writers were just like, people won't think about it. All right, another thing in season 4 is kind of like the time travel stuff. Now, I'm not super mad about this. I'm not going to like pull out quantum theory and try and explain why like time travel is wrong in this show. I'm always happy with shows and movies to engage with like time travel and rules that they set up, as long as they are consistent to those rules. And I do just want to note, I feel like the show has changed its view on how time travel works. Initially, it felt like everything that's meant to happen always happens, kind of like Terminator time travel logic. So they try and change the future, but the future always happens. And then they go back in time to try and change the future. And there's a certain point where young Five starts to meet old Five, like in the in season 2 in the past. And you start going, oh my God, like all of this has already happened before. How tragic. Like the world's always going to end. All of this stuff's always going to happen. Wow, 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 right? But then I think at some point in season 3 or season 4, they kind of like changed the rules. Like now when Five blinks and goes to this little train station, it's confirmed that they are now jumping to different timelines, different realities. It's kind of like a multiverse situation, it seems. And yeah, I don't know, like it was just a lot. They have a lot to chew on in regards to the time travel stuff. And there are also a bunch of different methods for time travel. There's the train station. There's whatever Reginald did with the reset switch, which technically isn't time travel, but now it's making a new reality or a different universe or something. There's the briefcases. Yeah, there's a lot going on, and it all operates differently. On top of that, there's Five's initial blink power, but there's also that one at the end of season 2 where he like literally rewinds the entirety of reality and gets back into his old body. A lot going on. And the most invested I ever was in the time travel was in season 2, when you started to realize, oh my God, even though they thought they changed the past and changed the future, old Five is still being spat into the portal to get to be young Five. Like, has all of this happened? Oh my God. Like, like that was when I liked it the most. But yeah, I feel like this show has always played it really fast and loose, and you really just need to like go on the journey with it. Like, for example, it doesn't make much sense that Allison and Lila's and Diego's kids are all able to be in this new reality. Not really. I guess for me, the idea was that they got put on that train and went on this train ride while all the other like messed up realities were like fading from existence. And somehow that means they can bypass the literal rules of like they needed to be born. So I assume they just won't remember everything. That's what the show told us. Does it take a bit of mental gymnastics? Sure. Does it make sense that Hazel and his old lady girlfriend are there either? Like they technically probably never would have met if it wasn't for the event of the Umbrella Academy. Like, no, it doesn't really. But I guess what I inferred was like, okay, in the ideal timeline, they are still destined lovers. They are still soulmates, even if they didn't meet through the Umbrella Academy. That was the impression I got. And sometimes you just need to do some mental gymnastics. I don't really get why people are being super harsh on season 4 compared to the other seasons. Like, this show has always had really messy, complicated plot holes and things that don't make sense. Like, for example, Reginald being an alien, that's always been something that has just been like a vague setup, and I've almost kind of liked that it was never fully super explored. In regards to unanswered questions, I've seen a lot of people on TikTok just furious at the lack of answers we get for a lot of things that were set up in this show, and to that I say, you know what? I think that might almost be the point. Like, hear me out on this one, but by the end of season 4, This show is so messy. There are so many different timelines going on. There are arguments Victor's having with Reginald, where Reginald's seen they're going like, I'm not the same Reginald. They have to go in these machines and find out different information from different timelines. It's a total mess, you know, like even the romance between Five and Lila, right? Like in terms of like age gap, it's all over the place, right? Like she is in a physical body that is way older than Five. She's known Five since he looked 15, but Five was actually like 75 years old. So mentally, he's the one that has the like power imbalance in his favor. It's a total mess. And I've seen people complain about it and be like, it's messy, it's gross. And it's like, fuck yeah, it is. Like, do you get what I mean? Like, season 4 to me feels like, yeah, this messy show that was getting away with a lot. These messy characters that were just, you know, blowing up and destroying realities, whether intentionally or not, and being able to just start anew and have fun for a while until it inevitably blew up again. It's all blown up in their face. And I think the romance between Five and Lila and all these unanswered questions serve that, because yeah, in life you don't really get answers to a bunch of questions. I've seen people really angry and upset that Five and Diego end their lives being angry at each other. They were just fighting. Lila and Diego and Five are in the midst of this like tiff, this like love triangle that's exploding when they pass away. And to that I say, yeah, how tragic, how sad. Like, I really like that. I like messy things, and I don't know what other people, I don't know what show other people were really watching. This kind of links back to that infantilization argument I was making before, where I think for some reason people thought that every single character deserved like this amazing, glorious, heartfelt ending. I've seen people complain that they made Klaus like a germaphobe and really sad. That makes complete sense to me. You know, this is a character that got away with being immortal and stopped valuing his own life, and now he only has one chance. You know, so he's a germaphobe. He's freaked out by his own mortality, even though that's a very standard thing. He doesn't relate to normal humanity. None of these characters relate to normal humanity. You see all of them suffer, except Luther. All of them are struggling being human in the first episode. So it feels like inevitably, like they want to get back to having the marigold, to having the powers. Yes, Ben spikes them, but, you know, that feels at home for them. And I think they're like homely existence, right? They're like baseline existence, being these super gifted beings, is destructive, is messy. And yeah, I like the lack of closure we get on some things. There are a lot of questions I have where I'm like, what does that mean? For example, in season 3, I think almost objectively speaking, this version of Reginald that is introduced in season 3 that carries on into season 4, the version of Reginald we have up until the end of the show, I think he's almost objectively nicer than the other Reginald. Now, he's not perfect at all. He's not winning Parent of the Year, but he is objectively kind of like a better dude than the last dude, in my opinion. Now, you know, a question I have is, why was he so bad, right, in the season 3 origin story? Why was he so messed up that Pogo had to like get up and leave, you know, and never come back to the Sparrow Academy? What did Reginald do that the Reginald in season 1 didn't do? You know, Pogo was still around in season 1 despite how awful Reginald was. Was Pogo just more evil? Like, these are interesting questions that come up with time travel, with multiverse storytelling. Like, I don't mind that I have a bunch of questions, because not only would the show have to answer a bunch of questions for our core characters and our core timeline, but they'd also need to answer a bunch of questions for a bunch of different timelines. And I think the show almost acknowledged like we have made a mess of a story and we're just going to have fun with it. And you really need to going to focus on the emotion. Have I seen a lot of pushback on Five and Lila? Yes, I really like it. I think it's meant to make you uncomfortable. I think that's what they're going for. Now, in regards to it feeling like a betrayal of Five's character, I do kind of get what people are saying. I literally noted in the past 3 or 2 videos about Umbrella Academy, I mentioned that the thing I liked about Five is that he's not really interested in like romance or kind of like really like big old schmaltzy moments the way the other characters are. He's really interested in like this clinical precision of like saving the world and like fulfilling his purpose, you know, of his gifts, especially given like how long he's been around, floating around different timelines. So I've always found that interesting about Five. So do we give up a core part of Five's character in order for Five and Lila to be together? Yes. But there are two defenses I can give to that. First off, they're stuck together for 7 years and he eventually caves. Also, I do actually think it was kind of hinted at in previous seasons. They both were like working for the commission. They're both assassins. They can both kind of like temporarily at least have the time travel teleport ability, like when Lila mimics him. And on top of that, their fight scenes have always kind of had a bit of sexual tension, in my opinion. The bad guy fight, especially the fight when Lila was in the bathtub, that felt like a very intentionally provocative, sleazy fight scene. I can't really explain it better than that. And yeah, I know he's in like a young body. I know, but he's also 70 in his brain. Like, give me a break. But their fight scenes always had a level of intimacy and, dare I say, tension that the fights between her and Diego just like didn't have. So in that respect, I do think it was set up slightly. They did also always have a bit of intimacy that didn't feel quite there with Diego and Lila. Like I think back to, I think season 3, when Five and Lila found the old body of Five in like the cryo thing or some shit. And they're sitting there, and it's just the glances they give to each other and how close they are to each other. In retrospect, knowing where season 4 goes, it does kind of make sense. And I think if you go back and watch the show, Lila and Diego are always bickering. As silly as this sounds, I think Five is cucking Diego. I think by the end of season 4, kind of the situation, the really unfortunate situation is, Lila doesn't like her married life. Diego has got a bit schlubby. He's got a bit of a dad bod. He's fulfilled that archetype. She's a thrill seeker. She's a bit of a ball breaker. She is antagonistic and can be immature and loves a fight. And Diego isn't really giving that to her. Whereas Five is also similarly spunky and, has a bit of fight in him and a bit of sass in him. So I think it makes sense. Do I think it's morally good? No, I don't think what happens between Five and Lila in the greenhouse is morally good. Not at all. But I think selfishly for Five, it serves as a really tragic, sad story. Yes, was it mean to Diego? Absolutely. But I think the idea that Five, that's the closest he gets to love, is at the expense of his brother's relationship, and he spends his last hours on Earth watching her, go back to Diego, and all he gets is a handhold at the end. It's sad for Diego, don't get me wrong. It's sad for Lila and sad for Five. I think it's a shitty situation. It's a situation that's created by the fact that their existence is fucked. It's messed up. It's really tragic and unfortunate, but I like it. And I know that's a hot take. I know people hate it, but I find it really interesting. I also find the fact that Lila, I think, grabs both of their hands at the end before they like mold away is sad. I really, really liked it. Now, what could have made the ending better? This is a hot take. This is a hot take. So there is a point, right, at the end where there's that big fight scene with Ben and Jennifer. And Five basically like emotionally disassociates and blinks away when Lila says, "We're not going to happen, we're over." He like goes, "Oh, okay," and blinks and leaves the fight. I fucking love it. I love it so much. The reason I love it is, yes, it is not like the typical Five we know. It feels like because he's let love in, he's having this moment of like, that's what I get for falling in love. Bye, and blinks away for a bit. And he goes on his little train ride and he just stays on there, he just doesn't leave, and he's going through all these different realities until eventually he sees another Five. He comes out of the train and he goes to this diner, and the diner is full of different Fives, and they basically tell him like every single reality ends up the same. The world ends. We can't do it. We've tried 146,000 times, yada, 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 right? Really interesting moment. I genuinely almost thought the ending was going to be the Umbrella Academy needs to sacrifice themselves in that reality to basically reset everything, remove themselves from these timelines, like have that be it, But Five bypasses that and is instead stuck in this limbo. You know, he's stuck on this forever train ride, and the only companion he has, instead of his mannequin Dolores and instead of Lila, is himself. You know, I genuinely thought for a second that the idea was going to be that the core Umbrella Academy, you know, unites. Five is exiled by himself and like emotionally from the group, and then he's like stuck on this train or stuck in this diner, and he can't get back, nor does he want to. Oh my god! If they did that, maybe I would have liked the ending even more. But I'm evil, clearly. You know, I'm evil. But no. In regards to the idea that this character deserved this, these characters deserved a happy ending. Like, no, they didn't. Like, I'm sorry. Like, maybe a few of them, but like Allison was a bad person, and not even just in like season 3. Like, Allison did some bad things. It is heavily implied, if not completely confirmed, that she like rumored her husband to love her. On top of that, she explicitly was told by Ray Chestnut in season 3, yo, I do not want to come to the future. I love you. I'm not coming to the future with you. And then when given the chance to create her own reality with Reginald, she chooses to have Ray Chestnut there. Now, yes, Ray Chestnut, that version, wouldn't have known, but like, fucked up. You know, Allison isn't a great person. Victor, what did Victor do? I don't know. Oh yeah, Victor blew up the moon. That's right. And then kind of like cucked that guy in season 2 with Sissy and Harlan, and then created like they're all either directly or indirectly not the best people. Funnily enough, I think, you know, didn't Five either attempt or actually successfully shoot JFK? Like they're all very messy people. You know, Klaus is sweet and well-natured, but Ben, like, look at Ben in this season. He like tears up a bunch of people with his tentacles. Like, mate, these people did need to go. I think Luther's all right. Luther, funnily enough, he's a character I didn't love, but I think morally, like, he's pretty good. But yeah, no, I don't, whatever. Yeah, I mean, I really liked the ending of the season. And the reason I say that is I remember I was watching the last episode of Succession, actually, and that ending, minor spoilers, but I'll kind of tiptoe around it. But that show is about a bunch of like really rich, privileged siblings fighting over their dad's company. And the last episode, there's like a shareholder meeting to finally decide this, and the 3 siblings go to discuss, and it ends with them having like a full-on childish sibling fight. Like, they're like throwing stuff at each other and beating each other up and like screaming at each other. And my boss said, wow, this is such a great summary of what the show has been. And in my opinion, the Umbrella Academy hits this with the ending of season 4. The idea that these characters need to finally give themselves up, give up the fight. It's tragic, but they were never meant to be here. You know, their existence never made sense. They were born without fathers, without like actual, you know, insemination. They just showed up in women's bellies and were born like 5 seconds later. They shouldn't exist. They never should have existed. Reginald shouldn't be here. He's only here because he wanted to bring his wife back after his home planet died or whatever. Like, they've always represented something not right in the fabric of our reality. So yeah, I really like the ending. I found it emotionally powerful and really tragic. And I really like that a lot of their plot lines aren't neatly wrapped up. I think this idea that in order for a finale to be good, all these characters need to be well-rounded people. Like, there are people that die at the age of like 70 or 80 that have never loved. You don't always get these like movie moments, and I really like that the Umbrella Academy kind of like committed to the bit with that. And yeah, there were plot holes galore, but I think emotionally this season is really fulfilling, and I think the show has always had plot holes. But I think because this season is the final one, people were really expecting those plot holes to be filled, whereas for me, I'd given up on that, and I just want to be taken on a really emotional, like, fulfilling journey. And for me, I found that. I love the ending. Oh my god. The visuals of all the little train tracks or whatever, like, evaporating into the one final timeline. You know, showing all the Umbrella Academy's greatest hits before they inevitably get wiped out. You know what? I'm just gonna say it. Victor sucked this season. I would be interested, and I would have preferred if the way Victor was handled this season was how Allison was handled in season 3. In season 3, Allison started doing some nasty things, but that was clearly meant to be the point. And you were clearly meant to sit there and unpack like, oh, did she kill Harlan purely just out of spite, purely just to be vindictive, or did she actually think she was justified in that? Yada, yada, yada. There were a lot of interesting things where she would do something bad that was morally justified to her, and you had to sit there and go, how do I feel about her as a character? With Victor, I've always struggled with the show because I think the show has always given Victor just massive free passes, and I've never understood it. Like, yes, Victor had the hardest childhood, probably, but they all had really awful childhoods. Like, Klaus, especially, had an awful childhood. He does not take it out on other people. On top of that, this is my hottest take of the video, maybe. Sometimes the ends justify the means. Reginald killing Ben and Reginald not letting Victor act on their powers kind of makes sense to me. You know, Allison even using the rumor to stop Victor knowing their full powers makes sense to me. Because look what happens when Victor has their full powers. They blow up the moon. They have these emotional messes. They create a Harlan. All right, it's not great. Now, yes, you could make the argument that the emotional trauma of your dad treating you that way would make you act out. But I'm sorry, like, at what point are we going to hold Victor accountable? And the reason I bring all this up is in this season, Victor has an outburst against this alternate version of Reginald, and Reginald's seen there the whole time being like, yo, I am not the one that did this, but we need to take out Ben. And it's like, that's why I like the ending of the show, because it feels like all these characters are in denial about what they need to do until they finally go, yep, no, like, this is the end for us. You know, I've seen people complain that the ending isn't congruent with the message of like season 1 and 2, where it's like, oh, they didn't need to kill Victor to save the world. Yeah, they fucking did, because it didn't work. Victor blew up the moon. Then they went back in time, in which Victor was another apocalyptic threat. And like, yeah, like they did. They needed to die. Like, I'm sorry. Like, I think they're missing the point. But yeah, like with Victor, I've just never emotionally connected to him properly, because I've always found that the show, for some reason, really worships the ground Victor stands on. Like, even from season 1. And I find they give Victor all these moments where we're meant to be seen there being like, yeah, fuck yeah, show your dad who's boss. And I think the more interesting and like complex story we get by the end of this show is the idea that Reginald isn't really the villain in the way we expected him to be. You know, we were waiting for Reginald to become the big bad, apparently. Like, the fan base really wanted Reginald to be the big bad in the last season, and that's who they go up against. But by the end of the show, what it felt like to me, especially given the fact that Five is like older than Reginald, or around the same age, right, by this point, mentally, what I found was that clearly Reginald is almost part of the Umbrella Academy himself, right? Like, they are all these beings on Earth that shouldn't exist with their marigold. Their existence itself represents the breakdown of humanity, the breakdown of the planet. So yeah, anyways, my point being with Victor is that it just feels like the show wants me to be sitting there like cheering for them when they're like yelling at Reginald. I'm just not. And honestly, by season 4, I was just like, can you get over your childhood? Like, is that insensitive of me? I'm just like, bro, it's a different Reginald. You blew up the moon. Shit happens, you know, like people have been awful to you. You've been awful to them. Like, you're 30 something, you know, if Victor was like 17, I would be like, fine, you know. Victor's like 38 at this point. Like, I'm just like, can we grow up a bit? Like, I know that's probably a bit mean of me, but I'm like, at what point do you just go, my childhood was my childhood and I need to roll on? Like, and like, yeah, Ben and Jennifer was, you know, getting out of hand. Like, it was getting out of hand. All right, next we had Luther. This is the best Luther has been. I really like this version of Luther. Luther has finally stepped into being full-on funny. I always found him a bit difficult because he felt like a hard character to kind of read what they were going for. But by season 4, it was very clear. I really liked him being a stripper. I like that Luther was the only one that when they all lost their powers was kind of thriving. 1, because he's a bit of a simple-minded character, so he's just having a good time. And 2, like, he has a body he's really proud of. I really liked Luther this season. And it was the most empathy I had for Luther the entire show, weirdly enough, was that final moment where he asked, oh, do we want to go around a circle and share, like, our favorite memories? And they said no. That was a comedic moment and an emotional moment that landed for me with Luther, that like for the rest of the show, Luther's never super worked for me. I thought it was really good. I really liked him this season. I really liked his like CIA plot. I loved the fight scene with Luther and Diego in the CIA. It was properly gory, well shot. It looked amazing. It didn't just feel like one of those fight scenes that was just fucking about. It was like gritty and violent and yeah, really good. I don't know why people didn't like that action scene. I thought it was awesome. I thought it was really good, really fun, and felt like the show having a moment of fun that like really worked for me where other moments haven't worked. The only moment of fun that didn't super work for me this season was kind of the cake gag in episode 1. That again felt like kind of infantilization humor. I think the setup was like someone was hitting a pinata and then it hit a cake that Luther was holding and it flew up into it. Just felt a bit like who is this for other than the 13-year-olds watching? But aside from that, yeah, I really liked Luther this season. Now, I've seen a lot of complaints about where is Sloane. Guys, Sloane didn't even make it out of the elevator. Like, as in, at the end of season 3, they all come out of the elevator and Sloane isn't there because the only people that Reginald brought back through that elevator were the original Umbrella Academy, or these people with the marigold in them from that original reality. So that made sense to me that Sloane wasn't there. Now, would it have been interesting to see Luther go after Sloane? Yeah, it would have been. And apparently that was actually meant to happen. So in that regard, I do get why people are concerned that Sloane isn't around.
What was sort of left on the cutting room floor that you would have liked to explore?
Yeah, there was one thing. I never got to do the Luther Sloane story that I wanted to do in this season. I wanted Sloane to be alive, just not remembering Luther, and him trying to sort of get her to love him again. And for logistical reasons and all different reasons, we couldn't make it work. We just couldn't make it happen. That was the one thing I wish we had a little more time to do.
But all that could have been, all that would have needed to be, in my opinion, is I would have much rathered if it was like the ending of Spider-Man No Way Home with Zendaya and Tom Holland. So like Luther maybe sees her through a shop window and she's with someone else, you know? And it's just this sad, like I could never be with her. But regardless, like I didn't think that was like a massive, massive issue. You know, Sloane never came off the elevator and maybe Luther just didn't have it in him to go looking because it's a different version of Sloane and like what would he do? You know, that made sense to me. All right, next we got Diego. I love what they did with Diego this season. It's really interesting because throughout the season, right, they're making this dad bod fat joke. And like, not to body shame anyone, but like noticeably, yeah, like he had a bit of a, you know, he had a bit of a dad bod. Like there was a bit of pudge occasionally. But then he rips off his shirt towards the end of the season, right, in that action scene. And not only is he not like fat or super out of shape, but he's like ripped. He's like shredded. Like he looks incredible. I actually saw an interview with the actor of Diego where he talked about the fact that the idea was that like when his power comes back, his kind of like body comes back, like the energy being there like also gets him back in shape, apparently.
We can either put you in a fat suit or you can get fat. And I was like, man, I'd love to get fat. But then I thought, you know, I'm going to be miserable for the next 5 months if I do this because eating changes everything. I proposed to him. I was like, what if his powers sort of take him back to like pre-season 1, like fucking ripped?
Whatever. So I guess that's the explanation. But yeah, no, I really like Diego this season. I thought the portrayal of sad, downtrodden, dead bedroom, like unhappy marriage was almost a bit too real. It didn't feel rushed to me. I felt like that was a very natural evolution. You even saw the seeds of that in season 3 when Diego and Lila were having these arguments about being a parent, and Diego clearly like wanted a level of like parental control over Lila and the soon to be born child. You know, he locked Lila away. There was this power struggle from the start, and it was prime for either party to take control of the marriage and the other one to feel infantilized and emotionally neglected. And I think that's what we see here. You know, it's a 6-year time jump, but you see that both of them are super unhappy with their marriage, super at each other's throats. And I think the way it's kind of visualized and shown through Diego is actually really earnest. Is it sad that on top of all that, Lila then cheats with Five? Yeah, it is. It's tragic. It's really sad. And it could be argued that if Diego never lost his powers, you know, which is kind of like a metaphor for losing your like manhood, losing your like sense of self, your like self-worth throughout a marriage, right? Like that's what it's really exploring. You know, Diego doesn't know who he is. He's sad and angry and resentful all the time. It is sad. It's depressing. Like I don't know what else to tell you, but really kind of powerful. And yeah, almost a bit too real. And I like that he feels kind of strange and out of place, you know, just throwing boxes at different houses. And I love when he realizes he's got his power back. I love how that's visualized. Really like Diego this season. I love the fight that him and Five have at the end. And I like that they don't just like forgive each other at the end. I like that it's a mess when it ends because I mean, they didn't have time to sort everything out because Ben and Jen were turning into a giant blob that were going to eat the entire city. So they had to go. Next we have Allison, and look, I know I'm the king of hot takes. I really liked Allison in both season 2 and season 3. She definitely takes a backseat here. Notable kind of plot hole, lazy writing, whatever you want to call it. Where is Ray? We find out off screen, I think, that Ray left. Just feels really strange. Feels like they didn't want to get the actor back. Feels a bit lazy. You know what could have fixed this? Why on earth did we not have Ray Chestnut being part of like the Keepers? Oh my God. That would have been so good. Can you imagine if just in one episode, like we didn't need it to go a full season if they didn't have the time, but just for like one episode, we get flashbacks. You know, can you imagine how insane it would have been? What an interesting parallel it would have been. Ray was suspecting in season 2 that Allison was working with the police. Allison starts noticing that like Ray is off, and it's because he's starting to have these visions and starting to realize that he's part of a different reality. And maybe the Keepers started to see like, you know, newspaper clippings talking about the arrest of Ray Chestnut, or like, you know, Black Panther articles about Ray Chestnut coming in from different realities, and eventually it broke Ray's brain and he couldn't be in that reality, and Allison needed to realize the impact that she'd had of like bringing this guy out of place, out of a different timeline. Oh my God. Can you imagine how good that would have been? That would have been a perfect reason for why they had to break up. Totally like wasted potential. And that could have been communicated to us in like a really effective, you know, opening 10 minutes and closing 10 minutes, the same way in season 3 you had that incredible montage with Harlan and Sissy at the start of the episode and the end of the episode. I just thought of that on the fly, but I think that would have been so interesting. Excuse me if it was a little like undercooked, but so interesting. But yeah, I think unfortunately in season 4, we don't get much Allison. She has a new power set, sort of. She blows someone's testicles up at one point. My favorite stuff with Allison is her relationship with Klaus. The best kind of argument we have this season is Klaus and Allison going hard at each other. And I really, really like when Klaus brings up the fact that they have this like symbiotic relationship. You know, the fact that like for her, keeping Klaus around makes her feel better about her own life choices. And there is probably truth in that. You know, Allison's been really shitty and Klaus can see through that. And, you know, is it selfish that they gave Klaus the marigold? In my opinion, yeah. Klaus clearly did not want that, but they did that anyway. Again, these are characters that are a bit shitty at times. But yeah, super interesting. I love the fight that they had. And yeah, that was probably when Allison peaked for me. I liked her throughout the rest of the season, but I feel like they gave Allison the most character development they could in season 2 and 3, in my opinion. In season 1, she felt like a bit more of a side character. Season 2, she really got beefed up. And season 3, she really got beefed up in like a antagonistic way. And in season 4, it just kind of feels like the come down from that. So yes, maybe as an individual season, not too much Allison, but overall I'm happy throughout the 4 seasons, the amount of Allison we got. Next, we have Klaus. I really like Klaus this season. I know people have complained that like some of his plot lines feel like filler and he gets taken away from the main cast. Yeah, that's sad. And also that happened in season 1 too. He got abducted in season 1. Like they've done this before with Klaus. He's always been a character that's been kind of on the outside of the group, especially early in the season. People used to not listen to him because he was an alcoholic, and now this time it's replaced with his germophobia. First off, makes complete sense for his character. This is a character that was immortal. Now he doesn't have that immortality for a bit, so he's built up a bunch of germophobic tendencies because he has this like mortality complex, right? I really liked Klaus this season. Really liked him. In fact, I really liked all the seance stuff. I know it feels like filler. I really liked it. It got a laugh out of me. It was probably weird and effective and, you know, kind of murky morally, but it's the type of like icky morals and like sticky situations that I wanted more of from this show around season 2 and 3. I found like, again, this show got a bit childishly inclined, and I really appreciate the shades of grey that this season is willing to actually explore. Right, next we have 5. Yep, okay, so let's talk about 5, all right? 5 is my favorite character. Does he feel different this season? Is the stuff he does completely kind of like out of character? Yeah, to an extent. but he's always been a bit selfish and a bit kind of like disconnected from the family at times. Like, yes, he does do everything he can to get back to the family when he's originally displaced, but he's always kind of like seen their like emotional issues and conflicts as like beneath him because he's been around for so long. He's seen so much of the world. So I can kind of buy that he would have some selfishness in him. And on top of that, I did mention before that I felt like I'd seen some tension between Five and Lila before. I find it super interesting. I find the character work for Five super fascinating this season. I love the train station stuff. In terms of like who built it, I just looked at it as like somehow his power, tangible metaphor for like the different timelines for him to travel through. Like I just thought it was like a representation of how his power works now, whatever. But like, yeah, I found Five really quite interesting this season. I like that he was a bit morally questionable, and I like the position it put us in as an audience because I felt bad for him at the end of the season. It was kind of this thing of like, oh, like you could have fallen in love with anyone. Why her? But also looking back on the show, given the fact that he spent so much time with her, I kind of get it. Yeah, not good to Diego, but I don't think we saw Five really ever interact with siblings the way that we ever really expect siblings to interact with. Like, I don't think he had this super, you know, sibling care for bond. It was more so this like older uncle vibe. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'm not saying that morally justifies him. I'm just saying it's interesting. The idea that like when he emotionally detaches, he blinks away for a second. You know, he takes a minute to cool off in a different reality. Like that's really interesting character work for Five and feels really like true to form. Next we have Ben Hargraves. Now from what I understand, this version of Ben Hargraves is the Sparrow Academy version of Ben, not the original version of Ben. I found him interesting. I did like the tension that he has with the Umbrella Academy, the fact that he doesn't really like them. I like the fact that he kind of like ran off from them and became a crypto bro. Like he isn't really interested in them because he didn't grow up with them, right? He doesn't know them. He's not really part of the Umbrella Academy. I guess my thing with this version of Ben is no character ever goes, hey, like this version of Ben that's been really mean to us that we're trying to save isn't even the version of Ben that like we love. You know what I mean? So at that point, it's like, it's weird that they're willing to kill a bunch of mercenaries and a bunch of people that are members of the Keepers and go to all these lengths to, you know, to keep Ben alive and eventually destroy the world. And not one character ever goes, hey, like, just so you guys know, this version of Ben has been a real thorn in our side. And on top of that, like, this isn't the version of Ben we know. He's kind of an anomaly and also kind of an asshole. But I did find his relationship with Jennifer really interesting. I really liked all their scenes. This didn't feel like needless filler. This was actually really interesting. And it's nice to see Ben as an actual substantial, tangible character. I also really liked seeing his power set. I loved that sequence. I wish the effects were a bit better, but I loved that sequence where he was like tearing up people with his tentacles. Really, really cool. And I really liked finding out his backstory. Of course, Reginald killed him. Was anyone surprised by that, by the way? Like, that was such a no shit to me. And I liked the scene where all the characters were realizing their mutual gaslighting. They were fed the same story. And I really like that this version of Reginald basically tells on himself, right? Like, he sends them back to look at what a different version of Reginald did to them. And now they don't really like this version of Reginald. Super, super interesting. I liked it. I really like Ben this season. Next, we have Lila. I really like Lila this season. She's nasty, she's mean, but she's always been like that. Like, she has always been really snarky and antagonistic and kind of mean. And yeah, no, I like it. I wasn't surprised when she cheated on Diego. I felt like you knew it was coming. You could see the pieces falling into place. I did always feel like there was this weird thing going on with Five and her that was never like spoken about. And it felt like it was fulfilled. It's sad. And it's tragic, and it's not very morally nice, but I thought it was really interesting. All right, Sir Reginald Hargraves. I liked Reginald Hargraves this season. I think the most I liked Reginald Hargraves was definitely season 3. Despite my issues with season 3, I thought Reginald Hargraves was excellent. I like that the story with him and his wife is substantiated just enough for us to kind of get it. I like that he's ready to retire at the end of this season. And yeah, I liked all the stuff we got with Reginald. It was really fun seeing him work with the group. And yeah, I enjoyed Reginald this season. Do I wish we learned a bit more about his existence and his like alien/humanity complex? Yeah, I do. But I enjoyed him working with the group. And at the end of the day, like, These are just characters. They don't know that their show is ending. So they're not going to constantly be engaging in these like last speeches to the different characters. Next, we have Abigail. I wish we got more of Abigail. I do wish we got more of Abigail. I think the fact that she chose to go against Reginald and take over the body and like kind of throw this whole plan into motion is a really interesting idea and a really interesting twist. I just wish we knew a lot more about her, and I wish that kind of like character was just built up a lot more this season so that twist really landed. But for what we got, it was pretty good. Next, we've got Gene and Jean. I already talked about them in depth at the start of this video, but yeah, I really like them as villains. I found them interesting and goofy and funny, and I also really liked, more so than Gene and Jean themselves, I really liked the organization that they like worked for and represented, and the way that kind of represented this show coming to an end and all these realities kind of converging. Next, we have Jennifer. I like Jennifer. I wish we got more about her. I do find it weird that they set up this whole squid thing and didn't really tell us why she was in the squid, but whatever. I assume it has something to do with Marigold or like the red element. But yeah, I would have liked that. That was definitely strange. Like there are some complaints about this season I do get, but I'm just not mad at it the way I was mad at season 3, because I think emotionally this is really fulfilling and a really enjoyable season. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff I missed, so please let me know in the comments what else you'd like me to talk about, and I might do a follow-up video if it gets enough traction. Thank you so much for watching, and have a lovely day.